Hello, and welcome to this eSchool News webcast. My name is Andrew Barber. I'm a senior contributing editor here at eSchool News, and I'll be acting as the moderator for today's presentation, which is sponsored by Dude Solutions. And over the next hour, we're going to talk about how educational institutions can protect the wealth of technology knowledge that they acquire over time, even as the staff changes, reshuffles, reassignments go on. But before I introduce our speakers for today and we dive into that discussion, let me just take a few moments to talk about the console that we're using today. First, looking at the first slide, you don't have to worry that you're not in some kind of groundhog moment here. The data on the first slide is wrong, and for which I apologize, but the information is as current as possible. And second, today's event is being recorded. So in a couple of days, we'll be sending out an email to everyone that contains a link to the recorded event. And you'll also be able to download a PDF of the presentation from that same email. And also, please ask questions at any point. And don't feel as if you have to wait until the end. If you have a question during the course of the presentation, just type it into the Q&A box on your console and hit the submit button. And I think we're probably going to have about 10 or 15 minutes or so at the end when our speakers can answer your questions. And we also have a chat function, which if you look down at the bottom of your screen at the black toolbar, you can see the blue group chat icon down there. Click on that, and that allows you to talk among yourselves, talk to fellow audience members, or to contact me or the eSchool News team if you have any technical issues or other concerns. And the group chat is a great way to share ideas and talk about some of the things you're hearing during the presentation and share ideas about what you yourself are doing. I do have one favor to ask of you, please. Please don't use the chat function to ask our speakers questions. They're simply not going to have time to monitor the chats while they're giving the presentation. So if you have a question for them, again, please use the Q&A panel instead. And with that out of the way, let me formally introduce our speakers today. Forrest Cooper is a sales manager at Dude Solutions, and he focuses exclusively on the technology needs of clients in the public sector. And Forrest has a background in information systems and network security. And over the past 5 years, he's traveled the country gathering client feedback and speaking at state and national events. And our other speaker is Karen McKenzie. And she's the Director of Technology and Innovation at the Cary Academy, an independent school for grades 6 through 12 in Cary, North Carolina. And Karen oversees all aspects of technology on campus, from curriculum integration to infrastructure to research and development. And she also chairs the school's computer science department. Welcome, Forrest and Karen. It's a pleasure to have you here. Forrest, why don't you get us started?
All right, will do. Thanks, Robert. And welcome, everybody. First and foremost, wanted to say thank you for taking time out of your day to join us. We're very excited to be doing this with you. And second to that, I also want to go ahead and formally introduce Karen. We're very grateful to have her here today as our guest speaker and really a subject matter expert on the topics.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited for today, and I think we should have a great discussion.
Absolutely. So we're just going to go ahead and dive right in. And everybody, I'm going to really just unpack a quick agenda for you. We've broken this really into 4 major parts as we discuss not only leaving a legacy, but building a legacy. And we'll get more specific into that today. First and foremost, we're going to be going into organizational change. We'll talk about some things that could potentially be falling through the cracks. How do we protect ourselves from that? And then really, what's in it for you? So with the first part of the presentation, just did a little bit of research just on change management and came across this guy. I always like to start my presentations with, learning something new for myself, but then also extending that out to the audience. And was pretty impressed with this guy, Heraclitus, who actually lived back between 535 and 475 BC. So, just a few years ago. But this guy, Heraclitus, he was actually a native of Ephesus and really was famous for even back then. We're talking 2,500 years ago. He was a subject matter expert on change. And, obviously the quote that's on screen, there is nothing permanent except change. was just one of his many quotes. There was another one that I think I like even better that says, no man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river and he is not the same man. And really this sort of resonated for me because I think about, first all the changes that we experience pretty much on a daily basis here when it comes to technology, when it comes to our jobs, when it comes to our lives, and even our society. But I just I think back and I'm like, wow, what was changed like 2,500 years ago? Was it a new color of toga available in the market, or was it now we have black olives instead of green? But all the same, I think it was pretty profound. All right, so kind of unpacking things here in the organizational change department. We're going to talk through a few things, including retirements, what really could be leading to change in your organization. So retirement, promotions, new opportunities have come along, or hey, maybe things just didn't work out with someone, possibly some performance issues. And just so everybody knows, this webinar today was really inspired by a webinar that we did a few years ago here at Dude Solutions. And that was called Bridging the Gap, and really was designed to raise the awareness of what's called the silver tsunami. So baby boomers coming up on retirements, just an enormous amount of institutional knowledge in their heads when it came to infrastructure for education facilities, for government facilities, for roads and streets and everything in between. And so really some great content was produced then, but it got us to thinking about how can we better plan for not only the baby boomers retiring, but just ongoing? How should we be focusing our energy on development? So we're going to get further into that today, but wanted to point out a couple of quick key things on the slide. I'm not going to read them word for word, but the data tells us 50% of operations management personnel are expected to retire in the next 10 years. That's a lot of knowledge that's going to be kind of walking out the door, and if you're lucky, they'll still be around. If you're not lucky, they're going to charge you $100 an hour to talk to them about it. 5,000 school districts right now have information technology jobs posted. I pulled that data just a few days ago on Indeed, and that's a pretty big number. But when you stack that really with just the national need for technology jobs, there's really a quite significant shortage right now. And now it even extends beyond technology, and we'll talk a little bit about how every department in your organization and your school could be impacted. And this last bullet point, I really thought kind of surprising. My daughter has gone to a STEM school, or has been going to a STEM school for several years, and recently Randstad did a survey about in 2017, and what they found out is that 52% of the students that they asked didn't really even know what types of jobs are out there related to STEM. So when we think about science and technology, and they had no idea what jobs were going to be out there for them and what's really in the market. And truthfully, upon further investigation, there's about 3 million open STEM jobs right now in the United States. So at this point, I'm going to stop talking for a few minutes. And Karen, I wanted to bring you into the conversation. I'm really excited to get your input here on sort of what your experience has been with dealing with retirements, technology, operations professionals, kind of going up and out. And I know you mentioned you also had even a recent story, but I'll let you jump in.
Well, I think like most of us in this field, we kind of get to the point where you name it and we feel like we've experienced it. Everything from company buyouts where, there's a takeover from one to the other, and now you have to merge two different departments into one. Retirement, as you just mentioned, and I did have a conversation recently regarding that. And then moving in a different direction, especially in whether it's government or schools. Every year they have changes that are going to be made, whether it's in the vision of the direction they're going in for that particular strategic plan, or if it's something, again, change above where we are that also brings in different factors we have to deal with. But then also the recognition in a lot of places that change in the overall landscape has also taken place, and how do we evolve with that? As you mentioned, I had a coworker come up to me and we were talking about his 5-year plan and the project he's currently working on as his legacy, and it was an aha moment of, yes, we have these conversations all the time, and it's something that we deal with all the time.
Yeah. And it's not always the most comfortable conversation.
Not always the most comfortable. And there are times where you are the individual who the change is being put upon, and sometimes you are the individual who is facilitating that change, whether it was your agenda or not.
Yeah.
So.
And that's, I guess, the one thing that I can weigh in on the subject, in my experience. I think if we are doing a good job as leaders in any job that we're doing in any organization, then we sort of know. We sort of have this idea of, this is the glide path that I have this person on for their career development. This is where they're headed. This is where they want to be next. So we have fewer of those surprises where they walk in and kind of just drop the weight of the world on you.
Absolutely, and I know it's such a catchphrase at the moment, as most things are, but transparency is, as much as you can with your employees, is the best route. Mm-hmm. Knowing that, especially in the case that I'm dealing with now, it's knowing that we're on the same page and have a continual plan put in place, and being as supportive as we can, because you have to remember, this isn't big for the organization, but it's also a personal thing that this individual will be going through, and it's a big change for them, especially in something that's like retirement, where it's something they chose, right? In most cases, they chose to partake. Mm-hmm. Whereas if it's something that's put upon them, you know, I can't control if someone chooses to buy my company and vice versa, and how do we deal with that change? And again, people's emotions come very much into play, and you do have to really think about that when you're having these conversations. Yeah,
definitely great points. So, you know, really, when we sat down and drew out an outline for the webinar today, it made sense to sort of start from the beginning, and really just pose the question, you know, what does it look like? You know, you're walking into your first day on the job, and I'm sure everybody on this webinar today has had a first day on the job. They may have had a couple, they may have had 5 or 10, and you know, myself personally, I've had situations where I've stepped into a well-oiled machine in the different industries that I've worked in, even prior to my current role here. But there's also been situations where I just stepped into a total mess, and the person there before me left very little information. There was no data. All they really left in their wake was some disengaged employees. So that was fun. But you know, regardless, we're stepping into different situations, and they can look different ways. So let's just say, you know, maybe your first day on the job, you may remember this. Maybe you stepped into a mess. Some things that need to be really labeled and identified very early on is, you know, as far as facing adversity, am I facing a resistance to change? Is there a lot of status quo flying around where people are saying, hey, we've always done it this way. We love using sticky notes and stopping each other in the hallway to communicate. Okay? Well, that's all right, but, you know, obviously we know there's a better way. Situations like this, no data, no work history, either a low or no understanding of current processes, and all the while you've got to be able to do a lot of things, justify the needs to get a department where it needs to be able to collaborate and communicate, start building those relationships. At the end of the day, we also got to get to a point where we're educating, and that comes in multiple facets. And all of this, especially in the technology world, we're doing while we're balancing just the craziness of daily operations. There's never a dull moment, and I know, Karen, you can certainly speak to that.
There is never a dull moment, and I love the quote that you had at the beginning about, you know, the only thing about change is change. It's one of those things that I've said numerous times before and in other presentations, anything in the technology realm is extremely personal to people. And if you don't understand that or approach individuals without having that in mind, then you are already putting a barrier between you and that individual. There's just no way you can move forward. And I think if you take that into consideration, it doesn't necessarily matter what mess you're stepping into. It's, again, that the personal relationship piece allowing the person to know that they are being heard and having them have an understanding of what it is you are trying to do, whatever that role may be, is going to end up working in your favor in the long run.
Yeah. So, great points. And, this next slide, it speaks to situations where we've inherited a pretty good situation. We probably have some data. We have a team of staff that may be excited about or even preconditioned to change. I know here at the Dude, we're pretty much accustomed to it, and we don't feel normal unless change is happening. We start to look around if it's too quiet and like, hey, what's going on here? But technology has probably been adopted to help with some of the key business processes, and then there's also the work towards following industry best practices. Things like ITIL standards and best practices. And then there's also, you've inherited that perfect situation of Pleasantville. But I can tell you right now, if you think you're in Pleasantville, you might be in denial, because this very rarely exists. So always be able to question, can we make things better always? So Karen, I know I just injected you for a question a moment ago, but really, I'd love to hear a little bit about your first day on the job when you started at Cary Academy. I know you inherited a pretty good situation there.
I'm very fortunate. I inherited a wonderful situation. And when we talk about the different types of change, the scenario that I went into is kind of seeing the difference in landscape over the years that technology services has played in education. And so in this particular instance, I was brought in, I like to say, a chief translator, if you will, between the education side of the house and the technology services side of the house. Years ago, they could be in their own little silos and in their own existence because the tech rarely involved the teachers and vice versa. Now, whether it's doing something as simple as this conference call or putting on a third grade reading program, it doesn't matter. In most cases, there's going to be some connection to the network and the IS side of the house. And so I was fortunate to be stepping into a scenario where they really were looking for someone who can kind of speak both sides of the fence. First day, though, was completely overwhelming, like any first day. I think for me, the unique piece was that I'm going into an already considered innovative school. I am not necessarily replacing anyone per se because my position was actually created, again, based on this change in landscape. And I was coming into a fairly well-oiled, well-respected machine. So my approach was completely different. I didn't feel like I had to go in and say, okay, this is what we're doing, this is what we're changing. I was able to kind of sit back and take more of the role of department advocate. What is it that you've been doing or saying that we have been trying to do for years? How do we move that forward? Because we all know for the first couple years, a new voice is the new voice, quote unquote. So what kind of initiatives have you been trying to push through that we can work on? Where you've been doing this job for how long? What was your professional goals way back when, and where are you, and how can I help you get to them? There was also a lot of confusion from my staff about, well, we already have a director of information services and we have a tech person, so what really is your point, right? Why am you here? And again, it's for that first year especially, it was playing up the I am here to be the one voice for both sides of the house that can really have these conversations to get everybody on board and buy into whatever we're doing. That changed year 2 and 3, not for the better or worse by any means, but that's when you start looking at efficiencies and other things. But I still absolutely think, regardless of where I was or what that first day was going to be like, that mantra of don't do anything for the first 6 months, kind of just sit back and take a look, definitely rings true. And depending on the scenario, even more so, advocating for yourself as a friend of the department and a champion for them and the work that they're already doing.
Sure. Yeah, and I think that's probably an indication of your experience doing that. So a lot of people may come into a new role, and quite often come into a new role and they want to just dump their knowledge and their experience on everyone around them, regardless of the situation. And that can, even if they have very good intentions, could have the reverse of the desired effect. Right?
Absolutely, and I will not sit here and deny that there were moments I was biting my tongue or after a meeting being like, how do they not see this inefficiency or whatever the scenario may be? That definitely happens. And it happens more and more after the first year. But I think the biggest part is that you, as a new person coming in, really need to understand the full dynamic of what this company or department has been through, or this group of people. What is the dynamic within that little department? Have they all worked together for years? Are you really the new one in? Are there some past history issues of, so-and-so had a big blowout, and now, they refuse to talk to each other other than email, right? It just, or this department doesn't like that department, or so-and-so from this department calls every other day about the same thing. Understanding where all that is, and then trying to figure out where the, I don't want to say truth, but where the accuracy in the portrayal of that is, that will significantly help as you try and move forward, and gives credence to what it is that you are suggesting along the way, because you can use that as the example of, I've seen now for the past year or so how the relationship has become toxic with this particular department. How do we now go about fixing that?
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think this next slide sort of puts a technology leader in the superhero outfit, and I would say maybe Captain Perception Gap, right? We're just talking about kicking down those perception gaps and helping people communicate better and taking time in doing that. But yeah, I think, like, to your point, regardless of whatever scenario you stepped into, good, bad, or ugly, you have to be that transformation agent. And really, at the end of the day, when you do break down those barriers and those perception gaps, you find that everyone's there in that building, regardless of their department, for a reason. They want to help students. They want to help each other.
And I would also say, because change agent is also one of those that it can evoke response, right? You also want to be like I said, the advocate for what is also working, right? And that's something that's really important, especially for individuals who have spent tons of time working and developing on process and procedures, or implementing and researching a new piece of technology or something else. The last thing anybody wants to do is feel like, well, why did I just go through all of that? Or I went through all of that and now they're not even looking at it, right? Helping that person, one, get the recognition that they deserve if the project was successful, but then two, if it wasn't successful and you do need to pivot, involving them in, okay, why were you leaning towards this? And what do you feel is imperative that we're looking at moving forward? Because that also will have a complete attitude change from that individual about, oh, this person is advocating for me and helping me get the right solution in, versus, well, they looked at it for 2 minutes, it's not what they wanted, and now I got to go do this. So it's important.
No, it definitely is. And there's, I was reading a book on psychology about 2 years ago. There's something called cognitive dissonance. It's where people just get defensive very quickly if you're coming after a decision that they made or a process they implemented. So you have to be very, very careful, because if you send somebody into that state of dissonance, they've just got a wall up, and they're going to stay status quo, and it's going to be that much harder to break that down.
Absolutely. And that would go even from an application level just down to a usage level. Well, why do you embed this into your Outlook email and not just put it as an attachment? Or even better, if you're a school like ours, where we're a 365 or a Google, so, well, why don't you just share it and have it as an attachment at all, right? People get very personal about tech and its use and how they use it.
Yeah.
So that cognitive dissonance is a real thing.
It's a thing. It's a thing. I try to avoid it with my wife at all costs. So, next section is really, what can fall through the cracks here? a couple of slides that I'm going to shoot past really quickly just so we can stay on track with our time. But in any instance of turnover, there is a cost and a risk associated. As folks are retiring, not only are you losing that institutional knowledge and the value that just really can't be quantified, but there's some other things as well. Most certainly, we're at the risk of losing things like experience. And the institutional knowledge we've talked about, but we've also talked a little bit about employee engagement and productivity. And we're going to unpack this next section just a little bit on this next slide, really by just starting with experience. And I was doing some research, and I found it online, so it's got to be true. But as of March of 2018, CyberSeek actually reported there was 310,000 open cybersecurity jobs across the nation right now. That number was actually closer to 1.5 million across the world, but 13,000 of those jobs in the public sector alone. And really what we've seen as I've traveled and spoken to our clients and other folks across the country, in many cases, schools are resorting to internal promotions, just hiring someone who maybe has been there the longest, maybe somebody who is a little bit tech savvy, and they're resorting to this because it's expensive to go out and find an experienced IT professional. So we'll be talking a little bit over the next few slides about how to not just combat that, but to start to grow your own talent from within. End of the day, experience does not come cheap, and whether they're manual or automated processes, I can tell you that when your talent leaves, that person may have been literally the only person in the building who understood how that particular process worked or where that particular cable ran to. It's no telling. Institutional knowledge, simply defined, it's what's in between their two ears. And I kind of posed the question here of how do you know what you don't know? I guarantee you the second that you lose an IT professional, you're going to find out real quick what you don't know. So that's all the more reason where there has to be that transfer of knowledge from leader to upcoming leader inside the organization. But more specifically, institutional knowledge is data. It's understanding performance, baseline understandings of past performance of different employees, systems performance. I mean, you name it. It's a pretty broad term, but history of projects that have been done, upcoming replacement plans for asset replacement cycles, or even things like a history of resolutions. What things have we done to fix these issues before? Technology and security infrastructure, that's a big one. Understanding network topology and asset location. These are all things that the IT professional is going to know that maybe nobody else does. Karen, back to you. What kind of institutional knowledge would you say is most important to get from your employees, and how do you go about it?
Everything, and ask. No, I think, it's funny. I've had two different scenarios that I've been in. One was at a boarding school environment that was well over 150 years old. And now that I'm at Cary Academy, it's the complete opposite in that we just celebrated our 20th year about a year or so ago. So wow. It's a baby in the world of government and education. And it didn't matter which environment you will. Anyone in those scenarios doesn't remember every single thing that went on at every point in time. Mm-hmm. Whether it's forgetting, oh yeah, way back when we were thinking about the future and laid conduit for this field that's all the way out there. Okay, we totally forgot about that because who knows when change happens. Mm-hmm. To why is it that we only put so-and-so's office phone on that wall? Well, we forgot that we have basically fried the electrical on the other walls, or whatever the case may be, right? So I think for me, the biggest piece was the fly on the wall. I absolutely, especially when starting in a new position, is basically become the shadow. I'm talking to you at every nook and cranny, watching kind of what you're doing in the sense of that annoying, 5-year-old little sibling that's like, can I do it too? Can I do it too? Like what? And then again, I think it's going about it in a different way, other than just saying, okay, Forrest, I need all this information, blah, blah, blah. You can talk about, hey, Forrest, in your time here, man, what was your most complicated project that you worked on? And having individuals talk about their successes and failures will also give you insight into some of the operations of school. That is not to say that document, right? Whether it's through something like Microsoft Teams or creating a knowledge base in whatever help desk platform you're using, or a shared drive, whatever, but you want to make sure that, God forbid, something happens to that person, that you would be able to the best of your and everyone else's ability, be able to limp along until you were able to make arrangements. Because that's the most important thing. And know what your emergency backup plan is, and know the phone numbers of all the vendors you use and who is their inside person that you usually deal with.
Yeah. Well, not to go too far off subject, I had an opportunity to go on site to Cary Academy, and I can tell you that your knowledge of the data center and just the setup, to a network security guy like me, it's obvious that you knew your stuff and you knew what was going on there. So that was really pretty cool. So going to keep moving through some slides. Employee engagement and productivity. Karen, this is one that honestly I know you've got just a ton of experience with. We've talked a lot about this, but I think it's something that really can't be overstated. How important you should really be considering the impacts of employee engagement and productivity when we talk about this type of change. So yeah, I think you had told me a story about really just better communication, but you tell me, what are your thoughts here on the impacts of engagement and productivity?
I think the biggest thing, like I said, is the communication. But then, as you mentioned, the partnerships with vendors, making sure that everyone in your division or department are kind of in the loop of knowing what's going on. I think the other piece is, and I know this is hard for some of us because some of us in management have that control need of wanting things to go our way, but allowing individuals who are the experts in their own field to be the experts in their field. That basically helps a lot, but we all need to be talking to the same page. So having a system, for us, it just happens to be School Dude, but having a system where we can track a ticket that comes in all the way to when it's resolved, or a piece of equipment that comes in through the door to when it gets retired and recycled. Putting in process and procedures that enable the entire group to be in the know about something or someone really has helped, because now any one of us can speak on behalf of what is happening in any situation, and that's huge. For me especially, because the rest of the campus still isn't quite sure what my role is, right? They kind of see me all over the place. For me, it's, hey, what's going on with so-and-so ticket, or what's going on with this? Do you know anything about that? These type of changes and type of technologies that we can utilize gives me the opportunity not only to make it look like I know what's going on, but also to actually know what's going on and speak intelligently about it, right? The last thing I want to do, and we know we hate doing it, is saying, you know what, I really don't know, let me go find out. And I know that's the right thing to say, but it's giving the impression also that I don't know what's going on in my department, especially if it's a big project that we've been working on for months. Where is it? So really having systems in place to track and communicate in any way makes a world of difference. Yeah.
That's one thing you had mentioned before. You were talking about how really, from really just an employee engagement perspective, you wanting your department to really be perceived as just highly professional. We got it together. we know what's going on
Yep.
type of organization within an organization, and
Absolutely.
that really resonated.
Yeah, you know, whether it's facilities, whether it's technology services, admissions, even the front desk, right? We are a service in some way to others in our environments. And because of that, I very strongly believe that we are our own little entity, and there is within that a customer service mentality that we have to have and have to live up to. Mm-hmm. That there is a way that we communicate, and that it needs to be fairly universal. So again, in the sense that, using help desk for an example, a ticket comes in, it automatically communicates to the person that, hey, we got that, right? Yeah. Or if we change who it's assigned to, if we want to have, depending on the level of communication, we can say, okay, this person now knows that it's not gone to the black hole of death where tickets just go and never come and heard from again, but that is actually moving through a process, and that we do have a process. Mm-hmm. Because if we don't, what ends up happening is more of the grabbing down the hall, hey, I see you, can I ask you this real quick? The calling of personal extensions or the personal emails where, you know what, I just got myself a wonderful vacation and I'm gone, see you, and I didn't tell anybody other than my superior. So good luck, right? And have fun with that project when you get back. That doesn't work. You need to have systems in place so you are all communicating or have access to the information. Yeah,
the hallway mugging, so to speak. It's you'd never know that, hey, you got a quick sec actually translates to 15 minutes.
15 minutes, guaranteed.
Yeah. So moving along, really, how do we protect ourselves? End of the day, what are the best practices that we're going to talk about today to actually provide a solution to the problem, right? So with best practices, we're going to unpack, community and culture, professional development, succession planning, how we're going to retain some top talent in an environment that is hostile. People are going to be trying to steal your talent, I promise you. And then technology tools. What can we leverage to just make everybody's lives a little bit easier, as Karen was just talking about. Really when it comes to community and culture, transparency it's a big word right now. But it couldn't be further from the truth. People tend to fill in the gaps in the absence of information. Depending on their mood, they're probably going to fill in those gaps in information with bad news or negative thoughts. So, most certainly important to make sure you're leveraging the relationships with the staff and vendors and students. And not for nothing, but every single person in your building likes to be recognized. They may not admit it. They might act really weird if you recognize them in public, which you may not do again in the future, but they do like recognition for their hard work. And that's something I've learned as a leader of a group of employees here at the Dude is you've got to be very intentional about that. You've just got to carve that out in your day. Block time on your calendar and say, hey, I'm going to walk around for an hour and just tell people what they're doing right. And if you don't do it on your calendar, like me, you'll just forget about it. So facilitate buy-in and adoption. We're going to cover this on another slide, but people leave people and not organizations. Could not be further from the truth. In an environment with technology being in the state that it is right now, I believe is it Moore's law that technology is doubling every 18 months. I think it's actually down about.
I was going to say, I feel like it's weeks depending on what it is. It could be every month something's changing.
Yeah, so really what that opens the door for is, yes, people leave people, but people also leave organizations that just can't afford them anymore. And we've got to be cognizant of that. So providing the right tools from a professional development standpoint, that's a great way to retain talent. Everyone wants to learn new skills. They want to get 1% better every day. And ultimately make people's jobs easier. There should never be a situation where someone can't leave work on time, go see their kid play baseball, those types of things. And if that's the case, we've got to take steps to create efficiencies, to put the tools in place to do that. And then really consider from a professional development standpoint, internal and external. Inside, mentoring programs, sharing that institutional knowledge that we were talking about, how important it is. It's going to do nothing but help you. And then external, look at third-party trainings or events. I know a lot of the IT professionals around this area are very big on just continuously learning as the industry continuously changes. So both community culture and professionalism development will contribute towards really operational excellence. But unpacking the succession planning and retention of talent piece, this really, if we do this right, the problem takes care of itself. If we are transferring knowledge appropriately, if we are putting in specific milestones and a way for folks to understand what their next steps are in their career path, this problem will take care of itself. But really what an IT professional might not be telling you is they want the latest technology to do the best work of their lives. They really want ongoing education, and they want to stay relevant in the industry. They have to. And really they want the time and flexibility from leadership to actually be able to go out and do it instead of just talking about it. Okay. I did find this online. I honestly, I thought it was pretty interesting. This is a little bit old in the way of data goes. It's actually very old if you consider back in 2013, this Hewitt Associates did a study, and really it was, asking folks to understand or what really drives and engages them in a time of change, and then what has a counteracting effect, what really makes them not want to change, and really makes them disengaged when change does happen. So really what you identify here is the key components of what folks are going to be excited about change for is when they can be involved in the decision-making process. They understand their career path. Coworkers around them are making personal sacrifices. And I can tell you that if there's coworkers around them that aren't carrying their weight, that is secretly doing some damage to that team. You honestly, you have a potential cancer growing there.
If I can just jump in real quick, it also does, I think, equally or more damage if your team sees you as a manager not addressing the issues or the elephants in the room. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't even have to be a big public admonishment. It doesn't have to be any of that. But if they know that there is expectations put in place and you hold everyone to those expectations, that in and of itself will kind of help squash some of these cancerous pieces.
Yeah, and I can tell you I experienced that firsthand. Early on in my career as a leader, I wanted everybody to be successful and just tried too hard with certain people who didn't want to be successful, and it had an effect on my team.
Yeah.
So it definitely happens. Achieving operational excellence, not only about the people. That's most certainly true, but they're a huge part of it, I can tell you that much. But at the end of the day, we live in an era where technology is here to help make our lives better. Many would argue that maybe it's not sometimes. I know the iPhone that I got for my daughter a few years ago I could argue that it's not helping. But just the same, anytime a leader is approached by a member of the technology team or really anybody in their organization saying, hey, we need this technology to do our jobs better, most certainly folks are going to ask the questions, well, what's the ROI? What's our return on investment? Karen, what do you call it, the return on?
The return on learning.
Return on learning.
One way that we do it. And again, it's because we're looking at things outside of just the purpose of technology. We're looking at what is the impact that a certain technology is going to provide for efficiency for departments and impact for our students.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's really a pretty broad array of technologies that are out there. Today we'll focus on something that I can speak to here, the dude, and that is IT service management solutions. But always keep an open mind and take the time to do proper due diligence and be patient with folks as they show ROI, and understanding that, hey, it just makes my job easier isn't always the best answer. There are also repercussions on, if you're making someone's job easier, you're probably driving towards a place of operational excellence where you're going to have better learning taking place and overall just a more successful environment. To sum it all up, there's certain things that just can't be quantified in the way of returns on investment. All right, so here's the dude. Obviously, we do have best-in-breed technology suites, including help desk and a product called Insight, which is agentless asset discovery. and inventory. We're getting some really great data back from our clients out there. We've got just a couple of clients. I think that number is actually pushing close to 12,000 at this point. But really, just from a facilities perspective, from a technology perspective, millions of assets, and the future really is going to be big data, and we're going to be just really just sending all that back out to our clients to inform data-driven decisions. But really, we've talked about ROI for technology solutions. I like to think of it this way, and I've actually advised a lot of my clients when they go to have conversations with leadership and say, hey, I need this piece of technology. And they just, in many cases, they may not understand the technology. There's some really complicated stuff out there now, especially now that we're getting into containers and virtualized environments and all this stuff that nobody understands. Well, they understand it, and they understand that we need tools for it. And without the proper tools, the comparison would be, hey, let's ask Karen here to go out to the football field with a weed eater and mow the grass. Have fun. So these are all things that from efficiencies, from just retaining talent, they're going to be frustrated if they don't have tools in place that will help them not only get better, but provide a better level of service for their customers. All right, so what does that ultimately help you accomplish? What do these tools ultimately help you do? Again, it's summarizing here, but cultivate and retain top talent. It allows you to make educated and more data-driven decisions, manage and stretch budget more effectively. A lot of the organizations that we work with, we're talking about not-for-profit organizations, so it really does come down to doing more with less. How do we stretch a budget to where we can do more? Whether it's someone I'm talking to, a city manager who, hey, I want to have more ribbon cuttings. Well, hey, put in some operational tools that take care of things in places where nobody really sees what's happening. Or it's a superintendent, and we want to go out and buy brand new equipment for the football team next year. That many times the first place we're going to slash could be technology, because a lot of times it's looked at as an overhead department, but it really is not. I'll get off my soapbox on that one. But also think about it this way, reducing risk. There is an enormous amount of financial risk and really opportunity costs associated with things like audits. Not having tools in place to make sure that software licensing is being utilized properly and we're not over or underutilized, or someone didn't find a way to get into a brand new version of the software somehow that we just weren't paying for. That stuff can get really expensive really quick. But
if I could just add to that also, just very quickly, one of the things I think that gets overlooked a lot, and we finally took care of at Cary, was, best intentions is to go with either the cheaper solution or not all the bells and whistles, right? Not paying for the extra, so on and so forth. We had that scenario when it came to licensing of a particular product. We were like, site license, way too much. We don't need it. We're going to go with X amount of licensing. Not realizing that the person who does our licensing was spending an exorbitant amount of time managing, creating accounts, and doing these, and that wasn't even really part of her job. And so if you take a look at it, yes, on the one hand, we were saving the school a lot of money on the line item of this particular product, but we're wasting a lot because this person is using all of their resources on doing things that is not really her job to do. And so at that point, looking at it, we decide, no, you know what, site license, yes, it's more, but it's actually better use of our limited budget and allows that individual to focus on what their job actually is and not get bitter or complacent about their job because they're doing stuff that, like we all have time for one more thing. There wasn't that feeling anymore. Yeah,
and when you think about that employee getting burnt out and leaving, the separation costs, the cost to interview and hire and onboard a new person, all that has to be factored in, even though I'm not going to take the time to factor that and add it all up, but I can tell you it adds up.
It adds up quick, and sometimes it's worth looking at it, and sometimes it's not. But when you do have tight budgets, it's not necessarily always the cheapest wins. It's also going to be what has the biggest impact and makes the most sense.
What frees up bandwidth.
Exactly.
Cool. So, leaving a legacy, what's in it for you? I'm sure everybody's wondering. A lot of folks listening might not be, in a place where we're worried about retiring right now ourselves, but most certainly you need to be thinking about, what are we doing right now to build our legacy. Making it easier for your eventual replacements, elevating your personal brand, retaining talent, and really one thing I think a lot of folks don't always talk about in their budget planning is, we have a 5-year plan. We have a 5-year capital outlay plan, or we have a 5-year technology plan, or whatever that looks like. But what is our vision? What's our vision 10, 15 years down the road? Where do we aspire to be? And these are all things that you should think about, and then just take little bite-sized pieces and work directionally to get there.
And for those of you who are like, we're in tech, how can we make a 5-year plan for stuff that hasn't come out in 2 months? A lot of it, I think, is as far as the bigger picture, right, the vision. We have a 5-year plan. We look at it every 6 months and tweak, but we have that overall vision of where it is that we want to go.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Karen, definitely thank you for your time. I'm going to go ahead and just start to summarize things a little bit here, and I believe Robert will jump back on. But, really in summary, I know it may be cliche, but every journey does start with the first step, and that first step is required to start any journey. So, my recommendation, I'm sure you taking what Karen has said today as well, take a step back and really evaluate the different corners of the operation when it comes to technology and other departments. But change is inevitable. It's going to happen. Get used to it. Technology tools, obviously, they may look like a line item investment, but I can tell you, if you do your due diligence, you're going to find ROIs that are going to far exceed any price tag. And then, proper tools for the job. Don't give them a weed eater to go move along with. Give them the right tools, and you'll find yourself in a much better place when it talked about retaining talent and leaving that legacy.
Definitely. The only thing I would add is don't forget the technology tools, more than just line items, absolutely, but it's also more than just the tangible. It's also the individuals and the teams that you put together.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, Robert, we're going to hand things back over to you.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Forrest, and thank you, Karen, for a great discussion about an issue that I think everyone on the webinar is no doubt faced or been part of at some point. We still have a few minutes remaining, and we'll turn to the audience questions in a second. But first, I'm just going to ask you all just to take a moment to take a quick poll to tell us a little bit about what your interest might be in. We have 4 different Dude Solutions options up there, from the technology management suite down to help desk, insight, and resources / collateral. Just click on any one of those that you want and hit the submit button, and then we will move on to the Q&A. So I'm going to do that right now. Forrest and Karen, on the we have a question from Jennifer, and Karen, you made some references early on how you came into the Cary Academy, which was you took over in a very successful organization right then and there. You didn't inherit a mess or anything, but Jennifer does raise this issue of promoting change in a highly successful organization, and highly successful organizations can obviously have their own blind spots. Everyone believes they're performing at a high level. They think they know where they're going. And sometimes that can even blind them to, obstacles out ahead of them. I mean, I suppose if you look at it, the Titanic was a successful ship until it hit an iceberg. How do you promote change in an organization that sees itself as highly successful?
I think one of the things, and the way that I've approached it, is because we are in the field of technology, things themselves and the landscape of technology changes so often. So what may have worked for us and has been highly successful for us, it might be a good time not necessarily to change, but revisit what's out there and see, hey, are we still doing things the best way that we can, or is there a tool or something that can kind of bring us to the next step or keep us current? And for us, in our experience, it just so happens that our implementation of Help Desk and Insight was a big part of that. We did it in other areas as well, but using that as an example, it was yes, we as a community absolutely rely on information services. We email somebody and so is there quicker than quick, and everything is great. But there was a lot of scrambling on the back end of, hey, did you talk to so-and-so? What's going on with this? So on and so forth. And so it was an eye-opener for everyone to kind of remember that the perception, not only outside of our department, but inside our department was important. The other thing that I would kind of say is, you do want to approach those type of topics carefully because, again, you don't know who was the owner of the project beforehand or what kind of investment was put in. It's always great, though, to kind of sell it of taking a temperature outside looking in, and also not looking to change, but looking to better ourselves, and from our standpoint of professional growth, staying on top of things and keeping ourselves current.
Okay.
That's the ideal.
All right.
And you hope it works.
All right. We probably have time for maybe one more question before we wrap up for today. Towards the end of the presentation, you talked about leaving a legacy and getting employees to leave a legacy. The question really is coming back to that: is how do you motivate your team to leave a legacy? You talked about having a personal brand, and that's one thing. But the other side of the equation, you also get people who want to leave in a situation like make sure that they'll miss me when I'm gone type attitude. How do you motivate that team? What are some of the strategies you've used that have succeeded?
Yeah, I'll answer real quick from my experience, but I also want Karen to answer as well. I can tell you that the number one easiest way to motivate is to start by understanding what motivates them. So it sounds a little bit silly, but you have to take the time to sit down with someone, get on the level, go out to lunch, say, hey, we're going to have a conversation that has nothing to do with work. What makes you get out of bed every day? What makes you tick? What's your passion? And every single person you'll find is probably a little bit different. A lot of people will say, I'm here to provide for my family. I really just want to save money so I can buy more video games. I don't know. It could be any number of things. But once you understand what motivates them to get out of bed every day, then you can start to teach them and explain to them the why. Why it's important for them to be concerned about the perceptions of the department, or to capture and document the work they're doing. Because it's really just, they may be trailblazing, but they're leaving a path for someone else to follow. And tons of experience with what's required there, an easy way to data dump and go from analog to digital. But at the end of the day, I think it all does start with getting on the level, be human, have human conversations with the humans, and understand what really makes them tick. Karen, I'll let you.
I was going to pretty much reiterate a lot of that, so I don't need to. But I would say one of the things, I have a 12-year-old son, and one of the things I tell him all the time is people first, then the tech. And that comes down to everything, whether you are a teenage child with your phone up to your eyes and can't see the world versus, talking to somebody about their end-of-career plans. Absolutely, I think two things. One, asking them how do they see their exit? What is it that they would like, and how would they plan if they had full and utter control over what their exit would look like? Is it that you have one big project you still want to work on, or one thing that you've been really trying to do and don't want to leave on any regrets? Or do you want to be that person where I'm giving them everything they possibly could need so that you don't need to call me because, let's face honest, I'm retired, don't call me? Or is it, hey, I'm making myself as available as I can? Those are the big things. And I think if you start that not necessarily with those who are coming to that stage in their lives, but rather from day one, then showing the appreciation, showing that they are valued as part of the team to begin with, giving them say in the projects, or having, and even more so, allowing them to be the expert that they are in their field, right? The reason you hired them, hopefully, in the first place. By doing that, I think they're going to have that established feeling of this is going to be an okay transition, and I am in a place that is thinking about me and caring about me and is going to help me through not only the pre, the actual, but also the post. How do we keep you informed, right? Because we all know the saying about burning bridges. You never know where those relationships go moving forward.
You really don't.
All right. All right. Well, thank you so much. I mean, unfortunately, that is all the time that we have left today. And for the audience members, if any of you asked a question that we were unable to get to, someone from Dude Solutions will follow up to get you an answer. So as we wrap up, I want to thank Forrest Cooper and Karen McKenzie again for really an excellent presentation. I'd also like to thank Dude Solutions for its support today. And one final reminder, we will be sending out an email to everyone who attended when the recording of the webinar is ready. So thank you all, and this concludes today's webcast. Goodbye.
Thanks, Andrew.